Hello there, it's Austin. Today we're going to spend a few minutes talking about brewing a pineapple Berliner Weisse. So let's get started. We'll start this 3.25 gallon batch with 4.4 gallons of reverse osmosis water. We'll adjust that with the following additions of calcium chloride, Epsom salt, and gypsum. For the fermentables, we'll be using an even charge of Pilsner malt and white wheat malt with a small 5% addition of Munich malt to go alongside. This will all be mashed together in my Anvil Foundry 6.5 gallon at 149 degrees for 60 minutes. Now, in the past, I've certainly talked about my struggles with cheaper pH meters, giving me confusing and contradictory readings, sometimes just breaking in the middle of my brew day. But today, I'll be trying out a pH meter sent to me by Eric Hill. This meter is definitely a step up in the price range, coming in at around the $60 mark, and although I cannot attest to its longevity quite yet, it does seem to be worth it so far, considering it's actually worked. But once it's out of the box, to calibrate it, it's pretty easy. You just hit the calibration button and then dunk it in the 3 pH solutions that are provided. Once the little circle at the top has filled up, it'll tell you to move it to the next solution. And after completing that step in all 3 of the provided solutions, you rinse it off in some distilled or purified water, and then it's ready to use. The first thing I'll be using it for is to check my mash pH, which isn't really relevant to the sourness of the beer, but it's good to make sure that we're in the 5.2 to 5.6 range to make sure we're getting good mash conversion. With the mash completed, we'll go ahead and bring our wort to boil for about 10 minutes to have a good clean starting base plate for our sour pitch. I'll also be pre-souring our wort with about 20 milliliters of lactic acid. The goal was to start our pH at around 4.2, and I overshot that a little bit, but learning all sorts of new things now that I have a working pH meter. So I went ahead and pitched our 500 milliliters of Good Belly probiotic juice. With my Anvil Foundry at right around 100 degrees, I went ahead and sealed the lid up and let it sit for around 24 hours. After a day or so, our wort had dropped down to that 3.3 range that was our target, so it was time to put on our steam condenser in an attempt to control the awful smell that can come from boiling a kettle sour, throw in our 1 ceremonial hop, and boil for about 30 minutes. Next step is cooling the wort down and transferring it over to our fermenter. We'll also do a quick gravity check to confirm we hit our target of 1042. Then it's time for some yeast. I'm using Imperial's A24 dry hop, and although I'm not dry hopping this beer, I do like how this yeast complements fruit characteristics, and hoping it'll work some of its magic later when we add in the pineapple. Speaking of, after 7 days of fermenting at room temperature, it's time to add in our 3 pounds of frozen pineapples directly to the primary fermenter. Then we'll let it ferment for an additional 7 days at the same temperature, and after confirming its final gravity has been reached, it's time to transfer it over to the serving keg. And after a week of carbonating and conditioning in my kegerator at right around 38 degrees, our 4.2% pineapple Berliner Weisse is ready to enjoy. So this beer turned out to be a little unexpected in a couple ways. I've made quite a few kettle sours in the past. I've used Good Belly, I've used yogurt, I've used probiotic pills, and I've also made some sour beers using the hybrid yeasts that sour as they ferment. I guess across all those times I've never really had an accurate pH measurement to go off of. And when you research a Berliner Weisse, you'll find out that the pH generally lands in the 3.3 to 3.7 range. I guess between the commercial examples that I've had before and maybe some faulty pH measurements in the past, I kind of expected the 3.3 range to be a little more sour. This beer landed right in that range at 3.33 pH or so. It's got a nice tartness to it that complements the more bready flavors coming out of the malts. It's definitely not as sour as some of the sours I've made in the past, and that might actually be my preference, but my preference aside, I'm really enjoying this version. The pineapple notes are also really nice in this beer. They're not super overpowering, and they're not really adding to that acidity very much. To the point to where on the nose, I'm still getting a nice doughy and biscuity flavor, but also with a little bit of pineapple, so kind of like one of those, like a nice pineapple pastry. The head retention is pretty good, at least compared to what I've gotten from Berliner Weisse in the past. Overall, it was nice to use a decent pH meter for once and kind of get a sense for what the actual acidity of these style beers should be, or at least historically have been. Really a pleasant, light beer with good fruit characteristics and still some good malty, bready characteristics to go alongside. Cheers!